Hello, and welcome to a Learn Master conversation with Ida Serneberg from Noroff. We are going to continue our conversation, Ida, about digital marketing. And this is the second conversation in a row of 4. I'm just going to very briefly say how do we structure this, and then we'll get started. So we already had one conversation. It was about digital marketing as a background information, a primer, an intro to the subject, where you talked about the concepts, the definition, the history of the subject, the pitfalls, and you talked briefly about some of your most favorite examples. In this section number 2, we are going to do a deep dive into those examples and try to understand what we can learn from them. In section 3, we are going to talk about the bridges. So basically, society, technology, and business all have a say in digital marketing. What is it, and how do they form the jobs of tomorrow? And the fourth one will be a sort of a toolbox for people how to get started, where to go next, how to get working with digital marketing. And we are going to create those 3 sessions in a row now. Sound okay?
Yes, wonderful.
Excellent. So, Ida, I'm going to start asking you basically about your examples in this second session on digital marketing. We have room for 3 to 5 examples that we are going to explore at about 5 minutes each. And you have, in our introduction, talked about a commercial or a series of commercials from Rema 1000, a Norwegian food store chain. Why do you like them, and what's the coolness of it related to digital marketing?
Yes, I think in order to understand that example, I think that the listeners should take the opportunity to go on the YouTube channel to Rema 1000, and you'll see that there is a sequence of series about the same guy, basically his neighborhood. And I think everyone's seen that when he's trying to open the door and he's struggling with it, and then everything is it's getting messed up. And it's, the sense of humor being used is connected to our time. So it's called timely relevant. And that's a very important part when you do content in order to fly. So
just for our viewers who haven't seen these commercials, basically they are Rema 1000 is our kind of bread and butter local food store. And the 1000 in its name refers to the fact that they only, in theory at least, have 1000 type unique items. And so they have this tagline that the simplest is usually the best. And they are playing with this super modern smart house technology that suddenly doesn't work, and trying to bring us back to a simpler time.
Yeah, exactly. So and it's very funny. Yeah, it's very funny. And I wonder also, because the one that got really famous, it's, I don't know how many views it has, but I don't know the history behind it. I don't know the agency who created it, but I'm quite sure that I guess that they never planned to do a whole series of it. So I think someone came up with the idea, and then it's been this series because there is a request from the audience. So that's also very interesting to take in account, that, okay, only because you find your idea fantastic in this digital world, at the end of the day, it's really up to the viewer to determine whether they will like it or not. So that's also something that I admire with it. And then there's this seriality that we are drawn to, that you can use the same idea for a long time. And that's something that I really find important, to try to find a coherent narrative structure in your brand story. And to stick to it and keep it, rather than try to make up something new every season, every sale, and in every campaign.
I have to add a little bit to your story here, because first of all, most of us have seen that open door commercial where the door just won't open because the guy has had a tooth surgery and his voice isn't recognized by the smart door. But it must mean, Ida, that they've spent quite a lot of money as well on airing it on all TV channels and very much on internet. So, how do you go from creating something really good and then realizing this is a super star commercial, so let's have a huge budget, or in what order do you do that?
Yeah, a really important question, because that also marks a shift in marketing and in today's world, that I would always suggest that you never go all in with your whole budget when you start. You should maybe start with, let's say 10% to test it and then see whether it's going to fly or not. If it doesn't fly, well, then you have to evaluate it and see why didn't it fly. And if it did, then you can go big. And if you think about it, it's quite cheap to go online these days and test it out on a very cheap basis. And then you, before deciding upon going everywhere. So that's the number one rule, basically.
Mm. And the other thing I want to ask you is this use of humor. So I'm an immigrant to Norway some 30 plus years ago. And I remember going to cinema and being delighted with two kinds of commercials, especially. One was for the drink called Solo, and the other one was for the Lotto, Norsk Tipping winners. And they were both kind of, foot in your mouth, cheeky, self-ironic, very, very funny and sweet. And I miss them. Why do we so rarely use humor in our creative?
Oh, I would say that's I'm not sure if I agree, because what we see now in particularly spreadable content, which is it's called how Henry Jenkins, communication scholar, calls it. He would say that humor is one of them, one of the 10 ways to get content to spread. So humor is widely used, and also in the Scandinavian context, we use humor a lot in commercials. It's also funny because I often use Rema 1000 as a case for international students. I teach a course in social media at the university in Sweden, where 60% are from other countries outside of Scandinavia. And I always ask them, okay, so what's this commercial about? And then they say, well, it's about keys. That's what they the takeaway from. And that's also important, I think, in today's world, that in order to understand the commercial Rema 1000. So for me, I'm a foreigner too. I was brought up in Sweden, lived there for 10 years. I didn't even know the concept that you just taught me about the 1,000 things that they have in their stores. Mm. So there we also see something about today's world, about the cultural context is often being lost. And that's something that you have to be sensitive about. So if there's one critique that I have towards the Rema 1000 is the fact that it's not related to their products. It's only related to their brand, and it requires some previous knowledge from the viewers. That's something that you have to and you must take in an account when creating content today.
Mm. So a lot of cultural context, and sometimes you can export it, but not always. Can you just remind me? So the seriality here, that was a concept that was new for me. So the whole point is to not just do a one-off, but create kind of a timely consistency, continuity about it. Why is that important?
I think it's important because I wonder, this is only my theory in that sense, but I mean, think about the never-ending changes that we have in the world, and we're in this constant change. So I believe that seriality creates some sort of there's something that it creates safety to us. I think it creates some sort of, okay, I know this from before. And I also believe that, so the narrative structure, that we have a beginning, a middle, and an end, that's the first type of abstract concepts that we learn as children. And I think that's the simplest abstract of every form that we have. And I do believe that that's really important. And often we talk about storytelling as this key concept in marketing or in communication today. I mean, it always was. But at the end of the day, what does that mean? And it means that we have some form of recognition, continuity, that creates safety.
I think that recognition and that predictability, and that thing where that this is going to happen and you still think it's funny and you're expecting it. I follow you on the fact that it might be giving us some safety and some connection as well. There is Rema experiencing this whole digitalization of my home and society together with me, and they're experiencing it the same way as I do. Isn't that nice? It must be a nice company to buy from then.
Because another example of safety in content is nostalgic content. So that's also one of so we use a lot of humor in spreadability, or in order to have things to spread, but also what you just referred to, solo or things from the past. I think that also creates a sense of safety because the future is so unknown and insecure. And then we kind of like the idea of going back to something that is, at least we know that. So you will also see that a lot of brands use nostalgia. They are using their old commercials, or they're even, that's also because of access. All of a sudden we have access to content that we never could access before the time of internet. You saw the same with the printing press, right? After the printing press, we had that huge era when we went back to all the Latin classical texts became famous again because we had access to them.
I think the access element is also super interesting, and I think the access element across new channels is something that I want to ask you about as we go. I think this was in Sweden on their airport express train, although maybe I'm confusing it with Norway. I remember, these digital boards that are now replacing the paper poster boards. And for a long time, everything that was published on them was just as static as paper. It's just that, you didn't have to use glue. You could use, a USB, I guess. Well, now, I saw this woman, a picture of a woman standing next to the airport train bay. And as the train came in, her hair would just go all, and then it would swoosh down. And it was communicating speed and timeliness. And it was so interesting. I was fascinated, mesmerized, looking at it. And, just as you as a person stand there and feel all your hair being moved out by the passing train, so is the woman on the commercial. And I thought, well, finally, this is a really nice and new way of using a new communication platform.
Yeah.
But it took years. It took 5 years before somebody started animating these things.
Yeah. And it's also animating in that specific context. Understanding the situation of the billboard. That is very interesting. Yeah.
A similar kind of blended experience is another example that you mentioned to me, and it is Skam, or Shame, a TV series in Norway.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, so to begin with, it's I really want to have examples outside digital marketing, just to have us to understand that it's not about marketing or advertisement solely. It's about the phenomenon that we can see in all kinds of communication in today. And this series is, to begin with, it's a fantastic series to me. But I also find the history behind it is really important to understand in order to understand its success. So the team behind Skam, they started before they created the show, they started by interviewing 600 young people in Norway, trying to understand who they were, what they were talking about, how they talked, what their interests were. And that created the foundation of the whole series. So that's how we should do everything. Every piece of communication begin with the audience, the customer. Who is that audience? And very often, both my students and customers, they start up with this very weird idea of creating a persona. And persona is a great tool where you kind of make an archetype of your audience, and you say, okay, my persona, my customer is 35 years old, and she's living in Oslo, and she has this and this degree. And that's fair enough as long as it reflects reality. Very often it does not reflect the reality. It takes us away from the customer. And I think the first thing all of us have to do is, okay, who is my follower? When I look at my back, who's following me? Who is listening to me? And why are they listening to me? And what's in their minds and hearts, and how can I tap into it? Really important. I start, even though, as a teacher, I'm also a marketer. I start every school year asking my students who they are, their backgrounds, what they like to do in their free time, and then I add that into my education. Okay, so if they're into Harry Potter, well, then I have to read Harry Potter. If they're into Fortnite, well, then I have to take those examples into my teaching in order to create retention. So retention is really important in marketing and in teaching and in communication. Retention is the idea that not so much what do I have to say to my audience, but at the end of the day, what did you remember? And Skam is the perfect example of that.
I have an insider story on Skam, and it was told to me in such an informal way that I'm not even sure, whether I understand it correctly. But it was a really interesting cross-functional collaboration, and we'll come back to this in a later session, Ida. But so NRK has this division called NRK Super. Our national broadcaster, NRK, has a children's division called NRK Super. And they are amazingly good at understanding their audience. And they are creating, a product after product that the kids just love. And they have made it into an art, really, understanding how to communicate to children. So when the concept of let's make a corresponding product, but for youth, for teenagers, came up, the request was that drama division and the children division from our broadcaster had to do this together. And they were put together in a creative room, and they very quickly found out, but we are too different. We work in completely different ways, so we can't do this. So they went out. They were sent back again, I think twice. And in the end, they figured out how to do this in a way that drama was happy with and super was happy with. And I just think it's really interesting, both as a creative example, of this constructive, positive friction. And also how, so as you were saying, one of the really unique things about this series is that it lives this parallel life on our TV screens and in social media. And you kind of lose the borderline between fiction and reality through the social media channels. And that was really an innovation.
Yeah. So that is the next thing with Skam. So to begin with, it's just the idea of having the great, the best insight possible in order to, before even creating the product. So that's the one thing. And then looking at the product, it's also very timely relevant in that sense that they are intertwining the reality of the show and our daily lives. it is, if you remember the series, so they had the show and it was broadcasted on the exact date that it was supposed to take place. They had their own Instagram account, so it was, you have what we call, that's actually continuity in that sense, that they continued the story across different platforms. So in order to create real seriality in these days, it's not only about like having the narrative in one channel, but across channels. And it was also highly connected to the audience. So the audience could comment and make comments. And I even ended up reading the comments because I was so obsessed with it. And very often people tell me that, yeah, it's important when we create content online, it cannot be too long. And that's really false. And especially if you look at Skam, the fans were requesting more content. They were like counting on it. And it was like, oh no, the Friday show is only going to be 7 minutes. It's going to be so short. So if you create jolly good content, your audience will request more of it. And it's just very fascinating. So there was this intertwined, even like a dialogue between the audience and the show. So all of a sudden they had a lot of Danish fans. And what happened? Well, they put it in one of the shows. They just had a Danish receptionist in a hotel lobby as like a flirt to the audience. So they had all these kind of small hints that came from the audience. They even the very last word of the whole show was comments from the feed made by the audience. So there you have the blurred line between being the producer and the consumer. I'm quoting Henry Jenkins now from MIT. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so genius. And still at the same time, if you look at from a cinematic point of view, you have a circle disposition. So it started with one of the guys like having a speech. And then he ended up with the speech. And it just tied everything together. And at the same time, they were able to intertwine the voices from the audience.
So I remember actually mothers watching this series and then being kind of not very popular with their daughters for mom, stay away, my thing. Yeah. And it was a really interesting intergenerational thing as well. So a great example. I just want to ask you we're going to go over to the gaming world in a sec, Ida, but I want to ask you one more thing about these kind of blurred, blended reality things. So for a long time, one of the coolest things, they have to come up with new concepts in media all the time. So there were these reality shows, but this was something more than a reality show. This was a reality show like Big Brother or, the sports or the island things or the farm things. It's quite heavily both circled off from the real world and directed. And here it's a bit like being in a zoo. Skam didn't feel like being in a zoo. It is a new concept developed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also think if you think about other series and fan culture, it's often very connected to a specific subculture or a subgroup. I think what Skam did is like everyone was engaged, mothers and in the beginning the core audience, the main audience or the main target group, if you want to use that word. Which was the youngsters, the 16-year-olds. And then eventually you saw the shift, and you could also see the shift in the 4 seasons that they had, that the audience obviously became older, and then they also talked to other target groups in a way. But yeah, it's interesting. It never created the kind of bubble or fan culture like Harry Potter, for instance, or Star Wars. That's a different type. I don't know why.
It's interesting, and something that is definitely a virtual world is Fortnite. And yet they managed to create one of the greatest concerts ever in terms of number of participants. And I'd like you to talk about that. And I'd like to admit immediately that if I remember correctly, they might have done several, but at least in one of these, my boys were going to go and watch it. And I was like, well, that's not a concert. And they were saying, why is not a concert? I was saying, no, but you have to be with people for it to be a concert. And they're like, no, Mom, I think this is fine. And I just think that also challenges our concept of what a concert is. So please tell us about the world of games.
Yeah, to begin with, it challenges our concept of what a concert is, but also what it means to do marketing in today's world. So to begin with, Fortnite, for those who don't know it, is one of the biggest current online games out there. And I'm very engaged in Fortnite because my nephew he's a blood fan of it. That's the only thing he likes to do. So every Christmas, every birthday, what he wants for birthday is so-called V-Bucks. That's the currency in Fortnite. It's a multi-billionaire industry. So Epic Games is the company behind Fortnite, and I would consider Epic Games to become, if it's not already, the one of the big five. So we have Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and who's going to be the fifth horse there? Epic Games is a good. I'm voting for them, kind of, because we have to understand that the gaming industry is not only for children, and I think in my mobile phone, at least, I have at least one or two of those games just in order to, distract myself or get a bit of headspace, and maybe you have too, and I think most of us have. So we just have to remember that the whole gaming industry is kind of a hidden secret in terms of marketing. And
can I just interrupt you for a second? Yeah. Because I was just thinking about this morning. So I used to play Clash of Clans. I'm just tired of it now. And I liked the whole kind of clan building thing about it. But I'm playing, I used to play Candy Crush, and now I play a Farm Hero, which is the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And I remember that our prime minister got, caught playing one of these in some sort of a formal meeting. But I do the same. And I do it exactly for what you said now. Sometimes I just need those 5 minutes of headspace. I need to kind of free one channel in my brain. I'm still listening to what's being said. I just, it kind of helps me. It's a therapy against mental fatigue. And I don't know what the dynamics is, but I think we grown-ups don't realize that our kids, probably to even larger extent than we do, use these games also as social therapy, as a free space, as many, many other things.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just keep that in mind. And then if we can have a small repetition from last time, I talked about distribution, and that distribution is placement, price, and people. So placement. Gaming industry has a huge amount of new types of placements for marketeers. And the one simple one that we think of is the very premature that we often find very annoying. That's when you don't have the premium account and then it pops up. That's a type of placement. They're often very bad quality. They're often very not so, it's still very, very in its first phase, I would say. And then we have this concert. So it was a concert arranged by Marshmallow, and they had their they released their song in Fortnite. that's also a placement. So that's a type of placement that you would call, back in the old times in the film industry, you called it product placement, right? And product placement in the gaming industry, that's something we haven't seen it so much yet, but it's going to be it's a growing industry, meaning that when you are going to place an ad somewhere, we're using so-called ad exchanges. The one that most of us are familiar with is the Facebook Ads Manager. That's one, the Ads Manager in Business Manager. Or we have Google Marketing Platform. There you have the ad exchange, formerly called DoubleClick, and now it's just called Google Marketing Platform, I guess. That's where you bid for placements. I'm just waiting for Epic Games to come up with that kind of ad exchange. And then all of a sudden, you as a company, you need to know, okay, where am I going to put my money? Where is the best way to reach the audience that I want to reach? And just think about it, Silvija. In a few years, maybe, okay, if someone wants to recruit my nephew for a position in data security, digital forensics, I mean, where's the place to go? Well, you should meet him and game with him in Fortnite and say, hey, listen, would you be interested in signing a job with us? So I really believe that gaming from so many perspectives is teaching us something in marketing, and also what we call affinity-based marketing. Affinity-based is based on interests, based on that you create a culture around what you're doing. And that's what we need to do as companies as well in order to win this younger generation, because that's how they relate and connect with one another.
Ida, there's so many other things I would like to ask you about this, but I just want us to squeeze in one last example. And my question is about programmatic. So we hear this word a lot. Can you please explain what it means? And can you give us an example of somewhere where you've seen it done right?
Yeah, so programmatic, I think it's one of the most misused buzzwords, because it creates some sort of fear that, it sounds very, very advanced. But let me take the example of Adlibris, which is a book company. I think I always take this example because that's what I'm a big book shopper. I buy a lot of books every year, and that's why I also are being exposed to their ads. So I often go on Adlibris, and programmatic means that they target me. They target ads to me based on a previous set of data points. And the easiest one is behavior. Behavior means that I visit their website, and then I go online and I buy different books. And based on what I bought, based on my behavior, they can expose me to books that they believe that I would be interested in. I think you have the same experience with Amazon, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I'm a fan of audiobooks. And, I started off thinking, well, I'll just buy the 12 credit subscription, and that's 12 books and I'm happy. And I ended up with more than 200 new books per year. And it is because by now, they have become the best librarian in the world for me, because they know me, and they also know how to stretch me. So, it's not just giving me books about AI. They are suddenly recommending great courses on psychology or great myths, or, so it's a really interesting algorithm, I guess, to read the user and then nudge the user in a way that's profitable and maybe good for the user as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I have the same experience. But it's also interesting because what I also have seen very often, almost every time, is that I get, so it pops up often 5 books. And then one of the books is a book that I've already bought. And in the beginning, I was a bit irritated by it. And I was thinking, they should know that. They have that data. That should be a slip. And then later on, I realized, when I learned more about, there is a book called Nudge, for instance, which is a really good book that everyone should read. And if you learn about social psychology, there is something called anchoring effect. And the anchoring effect means that they put something that is familiar to me next to 4 other books. And then I kind of relate those books. Oh, I read that one. And then I relate the other books to this book. And that again, they base the suggestions on what other people who tend to be like me and what they bought. So it's like you say, it's a very smart algorithm. But then we also have what I really find fascinating with Adlibris is that last year, around March 12th, when the country closed down, all of a sudden, I got the same pop-up again with 5 different items, but all of a sudden I had puzzles, and I never bought puzzles and all these kind of, and I guess that they then predicted based on the contextual behavior, the context around us, that there was a pandemic, it was a shutdown, and they just predicted that Ida is likely to be willing to buy puzzles right now, even though I did not have that behavior. And that is very smart when you were able to not only based on my previous behavior, but can kind of predict future behavior. The funny thing is that I never knew before that I could buy puzzles and games, board games and stuff at Adlibris. So they made that known to me, which I find very interesting.
I'm very fascinated, by the way, by the Facebook ads that keep popping up in my Facebook feed. And there are certain kinds of very robust but pretty clothes for women. Sort of a dress you can wear to travel and to work and and it'll work. And then they're sending me a lot of video recording equipment, and they're sending me some garden stuff. They obviously see what I've done before, but they are very smart in relating, I guess, to the rest of my digital life.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things that I do with my students is that I have them to analyze the ads that they're exposed to. There's also a way of going into Google, into your account at Google, where you look at the preferences and how Google have interpreted your behavior. Sometimes it's actually not true. Sometimes it can say that, well, it says that I'm single, but I'm married, or so sometimes they've misinterpreted you based on your behavior. And that's also very fascinating thing with data.
I think we'll get even more of that going forward in the future. I think we're going to stop now with this second session and soon start the third session, Ida, because one of the things I think we really need to dig into is this concept of ethical marketing, where they know a little too much about each of us by now. And the question is, how far should you be stretching and for what purposes? So shall we save that for the next one?
Yes.
Sounds good. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.